Good
Okay.
evening. Thank you for joining our 11th webinar of our 12-month series, Understanding and Supporting End-of-Life Care. Our program will be recorded and can be found on our Anthem YouTube channel in the coming week. Please keep your cameras and microphones off until the Q&A portion, at which time you can either type in your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we will unmute you. We are delighted to bring to you a legend in dementia training, Dr. Tam Cummings. Dr. Tam, as she is known in the dementia community, is a practicing gerontologist who has devoted her professional career to educating both professionals and family caregivers. In 2009, she founded the Dementia Association with the mission to inspire, educate, and empower dementia caregivers. At Anthem, we utilize her transformative work, including the Itty Bitty Dementia book, in our daily conversations with families of those with dementia. If you have not already received your copy of the Itty Bitty Dementia book, you can find one at your nearest Anthem community. Families, professionals, and caregivers, it is an honor to once again present to you Dr. Tam.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Anthem. And just to recap, I was in an Anthem community in Wichita, Kansas last week, and I can't tell you how good it made my heart feel to see such incredible care going on. Beautiful community, folks doing things that a lot of times we don't think about. That community was actually building jewelry to sell to support the fallen firemen's group in Wichita because they had lost a fireman. And it takes you back and makes you remember even people with dementia need to be needed. And what Anthem was doing to meet that need to be helpful was just it took my breath away. It made me have hope for how we do care, and because they are doing such an extraordinary job of care. It's really just a pleasure to work with y'all. I also want to say hello to Kelly and Diane. I met y'all. Y'all are running the support group there in Wichita, and you're doing a great job. They brought 21 people to the conference. And so we just had a lovely time meeting them. And I think they're having a watch party tonight. So, hey to all of you guys up there in Wichita, and then to everyone else as well. This is a difficult topic because we are going to talk about the end of life. And so before we do that, let's just sort of take a moment and remember our breathing exercises. Both feet flat on the ground. You breathe in to the count of 4, hold for 2 breaths, breathe out to the count of 6, hold for 2 breaths, breathe back in. And just remember as we go through this can be really difficult, Chris, because part of my training is in thanatology, which is the study of death. And it's important that you know and understand what happens at the end of life. And that's something that has changed, Chris, in the last 60 years or so. Because we're no longer a rural nation where the majority of our people live in a country setting, people don't see death anymore. And death is kept hidden from us by a loved one being placed in ICU and you're not able to come in, by physicians who are not trained in the end of life care. And that's because physicians are all trained to sustain life. So today we're going to talk about what happens in the end of life, the things that you will see as your loved one progresses to the end of life, and then some tools that we have that will help you recognize and realize what's going on with your loved one. So we may have to stop at a few moments and just take a breath as we focus on what's happening to your loved one. So thanatology is one of the branches of gerontology. And gerontology is a multidisciplinary degree. So I have education in the study of death and death culture. And what we know is that in only a few generations, we've moved from where people saw the death of their loved ones and saw death routinely. If you grew up on a farm or a ranch, not every baby chicken makes it, not every calf or lamb or kitten or puppy survives birth. They don't survive to be full grown animals. So you see death that way. And in my own family, my mother clearly remembers when her grandfather passed that her mother, who was his daughter in law, bathed his body. She washed his body. They dressed him, and he was actually laid out on a dining table. Runners were sent to his sons who lived around the county, and the sons began to arrive that evening. They set up with his body through the night. They built him a coffin and they buried him the next day. And that is something that people don't see anymore, people don't do anymore. And in my own lifetime, I have witnessed where when we had a family member die, a one of the surviving family members would stay at the funeral home all night long with the loved one's body, and that was part of the family ritual. And now that doesn't even happen. And so as we became more and more urban, people got moved away from what happened with death. And with the development of funeral homes, then we begin to turn the death of our loved ones over to someone else. And so coffins aren't made anymore. Families don't dig their own graves. That's all done by companies. And so part of being in the room with a person who has passed is part of the grieving process that allows your brain and your body and your heart to begin to understand that this person is truly gone. When you look at different societies, Chris, you find that there's very different ways people view death. There are cultures where once a person passed, every member of the tribe had their name changed. There are cultures where once a person dies, their name is never spoken again because that's considered rude. There are cultures where when a person died, a window was opened on a certain side of the house. In the Navajo culture, a hole was made in the roof to allow the spirit to be able to move on to heaven. There are cultures where when a person passes, the people in that culture believe that you shouldn't enter that room for a period of 3 days, the room that they died in, because you can interfere with the soul trying to leave the body. So different cultures have different views about death. Different cultures have different ways that a person is buried or that their body is cared for once death has occurred. And in the culture that we're in, it can be much, much different from somebody from another country or even a different part of our own country. So you see death handled in different ways. As I was going to San Antonio this week, as I went through a small town, there was actually a funeral happening. And where I'm from in Texas, when you see a funeral procession coming, you actually pull over to the side of the road and stop your vehicle to show respect for the person that has died. That doesn't happen in larger cities because of the amount of traffic, the amount of people, the amount of funerals. And so that is different for me being from a small rural area than it might be for somebody who's from a large city. So thanatology is a very real thing, and it is the study of death and death culture. And we're sort of to the point where some people feel a need to go to a funeral. Other people may find that their grief process is something that is completely different. And in dementia, the grief that you feel and the way you feel about death can be very, very different. For example, it is not at all unusual for the loved ones of a person with dementia to just wish that death could come, that their person could simply go to sleep tonight and this horrible thing could be over. And that's normal. That's normal to wish your loved one could just not be a person with brain damage anymore, a person that you're watching slowly die. And so grief is very present in families of people with advanced dementia, and that's a normal thing for you to be feeling. In dementia, we talk about the long goodbye. And it's the long goodbye because even though we're using Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's and David Kessler's stages of grief, what we know happens in families of people with dementia is that they go through these stages over and over and over again because your loved one continues to decline as the disease progresses. And this decline can be so severe that you may feel like your loved one has already passed. And what makes me think about that, Chris, is I called a family once to tell them that their father was dying that weekend. If she wanted to tell her husband goodbye, if the children or the grandchildren wanted to come, they needed to come now because he was actively dying and was going to be gone in about 72 hours. And Chris, the wife, said to me, call the nursing home, or I'm sorry, call the funeral home. My husband died 6 years ago. And at the time I was shocked by that, Chris. I thought, my goodness, how could you be that way? And as time went on and as I learned more, I realized that for some families, that is the normal thing. Their loved one has stopped being their loved one because of what the disease has done to their brain. And the long goodbye that family caregivers of people with dementia go through, it's called that because over and over, as your person has another step down, as they move into another stage, as they become less stable, you may actually go back through all the stages of grief over again. And Chris, even though this is the way the stages of grief are written, it doesn't mean that everybody will go through all of these different aspects of grief. You may have somebody who gets stuck in anger. You may have somebody stuck in denial. You may have somebody who moves quickly to acceptance that this is how life is. We come in, we live, and then we die. Or you may have somebody who continues to go through these same things over and over and over again. It is normal to have a sense of denial. That is a normal human reaction when we're told something shocking. So when you find out that your loved one has a terminal brain disease, it is normal for you to say no. No, they've got to have that wrong. That can't be right. It is normal to be angry. And Chris, you and I have talked about this before. You know that I've told you sometimes people are angry because we're giving them information about the disease, and they're angry because the doctors didn't tell them this. And that's an okay thing to feel. I mean, really anything you feel about grief is okay, but we just don't want you to get stuck in grief. It is normal for you to bargain. Oh God, if you'll do this for my loved one, I promise I'll do this. That's a normal human thing to do. It comes out of anguish, it comes out of pain, it comes out of hurt, it comes out of love. It is normal to feel depression when you look at this disease and what it's doing to your loved one, when you worry from day to day about what's going to happen next. It is normal for you to have depression. In fact, we know that most family caregivers develop anxiety and depression during the course of their loved one's disease because you are watching somebody with a terminal disease slowly go away from you. And we want and hope everybody will come to a moment of acceptance, but that doesn't happen for everybody right away because we all truly grieve differently. I have met adult children of people with dementia who are stuck in anger. They're angry at the system, they're angry at the doctors. Sometimes they're angry at their own loved one because they view part of their behavior may have been a causation of their dementia. And, that's going to be something like an alcohol dementia, dementia that's caused by smoking. So you can have some legitimate anger there because of how hurt you're feeling, because of the loss you're feeling, and because of the pain that you and I feel when someone we love is in a terminal illness or when someone we love passes. That is a very real thing that you feel, and it is actually physically painful. And I think that's something a lot of times we don't realize. Your stomach churns, you wake up and you don't feel right. You may actually feel guilty, Chris, because you woke up and for a few moments you forgot your loved one had passed. And that can make you angry at yourself. And then that can start stages of grief all over again. Some people, again, move through every stage and then go through all the stages over and over again. Some people are just wired differently. They go through the stages at a different pace, or they go through the stages and move to acceptance much faster than other people. But it's not a contest. Everybody grieves differently. And you, Chris, may grieve completely differently than your spouse does, different than the people around you do, different than your family members do. Everybody has their own experiences and everybody feels and processes grief in a different manner. So don't feel badly and don't be upset with somebody. Teenagers grieve differently than adults do. Older adults grieve differently than younger adults do. But as you see yourself grieving, it's okay to say, this is what I'm feeling right now. And that's normal. And it is not unusual that even after your loved one passes, that you may feel that you're at acceptance, you've grieved all you're going to grieve. But it's also normal that when your loved one passes, that you start the stages of grief over again. Now, in dementia care, and this is one of the things that makes this disease so terribly difficult for our family members, is that your person wasn't suddenly taken from you. There wasn't a massive heart attack, there wasn't a car accident, they weren't suddenly taken from you, but slowly over time, the person that you knew is going away, because as the brain tissue dies, as each little cell dies, that takes a bit of who that person is that you knew. Your brain is what gives you your personality. It's what makes you who you are, who I am. And so as you watch somebody that you care about deeply being affected by this disease, it's normal for family members to develop post-death grief. And post-death grief means that you are grieving for your loved one as though they had already died, even though they're still here and they're still alive. And it's because this is no longer the person that you knew. This is no longer your mother. This is your mother with severe brain damage. This is no longer your spouse. This is a person you loved who is going away from you. And families frequently, Chris, and I know you've heard this in your career, they describe the disease process as turning their loved one into the shell of who they were. Families tell me weekly or daily that that person they're doing care for is only a fraction of who they used to be, that they look like the person that was their mother, their father, their spouse, but that person is going away. When families write poetry or write about their loved one, it's not at all uncommon that they make a comparison to a seashell that's being slowly destroyed by the waves crashing against it over and over again. Grief causes real physical pain. And I think sometimes that's something that catches people off guard. After the loss of your loved one, you may go to the doctor trying to find a causation for why your body feels the way it does, and the doctor can't find a reason. And it's because the reason you're hurting is actually the physical component of grief and what it does to us. And Chris, in research, they have actually discovered that there really is something called, it's been named broken heart syndrome. And what that means is you hurt so badly over the loss of your loved one that it actually develops into a cardiac disease and causes death. But people do develop broken heart syndrome. So when you feel like you're all twisted up inside, when you feel like there's something in you and you can't quite put your finger on it, when your heart literally aches, that is grief, and it is the physical aspect of grief that we feel. We also find that in the people around us, that we can run into people that are afraid to even talk about death. And death is the other side of life. We're born, we live, and then humans die. And if you're afraid to talk about death, it can make it even harder for you when it is your loved one's time. And so, one of the things that I try to remember is that as you age, death is less and less of a scary thing. Death actually may be something you begin to welcome. It's not the horrible, scary thing it was. And that's just part of the aging process. And most people, when you study grief and death, you find that most people are not afraid to die. They're afraid to die with pain. And so one of the things that happens is we bring in hospice care, we have our own physicians looking, and we're doing everything we can to alleviate or bring down the pain level of someone as they're beginning to move into the final part of life. And it may be normal, Chris, for us to run into somebody who's afraid to talk about death because it's so painful watching the slow death that your loved one is going through. Does that make sense, Chris?
It does.
Okay. Now, there is a dignity in life And the dignity in life is that you show people respect. We respect them for being alive. We respect them for their wisdom. We respect them for their traits, for their abilities, for the wonderful things that they can do. We respect them for the place they hold in our life. And what is the dignity of life in dementia? Isn't it, Chris, that we should still continue to treat that person with respect? One of the hardest things that we see in dementia care that makes me stop what I'm doing and go interrupt people when I probably should leave them alone, but it's somebody failing to treat this disease and the person who has it with respect. If your loved one's neck can no longer support their head, and because of that, the chin of the person is down on their chest, that hurts. They may or may not be feeling the pain, but they're not doing that behavior on purpose. So we don't follow people with dementia around, especially late stage dementia, and tell them to put their shoulders back and hold their head up and chastise them, shame them, be rude to them. People with dementia are doing the very best they can at every moment with the brain cells that are working in that moment. And we treat them with dignity because we never forget to treat them with respect. They may now have the mental ability of a 4-year-old, but Chris, that doesn't mean we get to talk to them as though they're children. We must maintain the dignity of their life and the life they've lived. And the way they do that, that we do that when a person has developed this brain disease, is that we continue to make sure not only do we treat them respectfully, but so does everybody who comes in contact with them. And I think having been in your communities and seeing how your staff interacts, I think that Anthem Memory Care has got that one pretty well learned by their staff members. Treating people with respect all the way to the end, even when they've done something that may be driving you crazy, you still have to understand this is an adult and this is an adult with brain damage, and nothing that they're doing is happening on purpose. When we begin to lose that loved one, the loss isn't just the loss of your loved one physically being here with us. It is the identity you had as a couple. You were Mr. and Mrs. You had a spouse. You had somebody that you identified as a spouse and you identified as their spouse. And it can make you feel very raw inside. And people can say things without meaning to. They can say, I know how you feel. And the reality is, no, you don't. And in dementia, Chris, I have heard things like, well, they're better off now. Well, that may be true, but I don't need you to tell me that because that was still my father or my mother. Another thing that's said is, well, they were 96. What did you expect? And people actually say these things to somebody who's grieving. And part of the loss has been happening for a long, long time for you family caregivers. You've been doing care for at least 10 years, and every day of those 10 years, you saw a little bit more gone from your loved one. The type of dementia they have means their behaviors may be different, and that's its own set of loss. I've seen families get very upset because they felt like their mother had lost her social skills. And she had, but it's part of the disease. It's nothing she was doing on purpose. You can feel lost because of the raw, just the very rawness you feel inside, and your nerves can feel raw to where, Chris, if I said something just slightly off kilter, you may snap and take my head off. And it's really grief that you're experiencing. It's not necessarily what I did. I was just there in that moment. You have an uncertainty about the future, and that can be everything from being afraid that this disease is never going to reach its end, and at the same time being very, very afraid of your loved one going, and at the same time feeling inside that if they could just go to sleep tonight, they would finally be at peace. And that can then make you feel very confused, make you feel like you're not thinking correctly, something's wrong with you. And Chris, you and I both know that it is normal to wish your loved one could just have this over. And that's a normal thing to think. People who don't think that, I worry about. It's a human reaction. This is someone that you love. You may be worried about there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And so that can be a huge adjustment for you. And family, or not so much family, although you may have had family sort of go out of the picture, but friends have stopped. And so there's been the loss of that contact with people outside of your marriage structure. It's normal to feel angry. And Chris, I think, sometimes we don't think about this a whole lot because we want everybody to finish grieving right now and get happy again. But grieving is great sadness, and it can even feel bitter to you, and it can make you bitter towards others for a short period of time or a long period of time. And again, everything you feel in grief is normal. It is a normal human reaction that you're experiencing, and how could you not suffer? We know from research and study that spirituality in dementia care is very important, especially towards the end of life. We know that reading sacred text to people calms them and soothes them. We know that meditation or prayer is very important. Many times, a person with dementia who becomes tearful, if you ask them if you would like a prayer said with them, that is their background. They were raised in church, they were raised in synagogue, and a prayer is a very important thing. Holding religious icons such as rosary beads, those things are very soothing to people because Catholics are doing a form of prayer or meditation when they do their prayers at night and they do their rosary beads. Religious music has a different feeling and a different tone to it. And those things are also very, very important. Now, Chris, personally, when I'm around someone and they're passing, I will ask the family what was their religion, what did they do? And I will read to that person when no one else is around. I read Psalms 23, which is, yea, though I walk through the valley of death. I read the Easter story. I read the Christmas story. And I was with a lady one night, and when I came in, it was evident that she was only hours away from death. And both of her sons were notified, and they began to drive towards the community that where we were. And it was a few hours drive for each one of them. And as I looked around her apartment, I found a brand new Bible that a friend of hers had given her. Now, this lady had had an unusual life, Chris. She had been married and divorced and was a single mother who raised two sons. When her sons finished college, she started college and she got her bachelor's and her master's degree. She went to work for the state where she lived in health and human services, and she worked her way, Chris, all the way to the top. And then she fell in love and married a wonderful man. They had a ranch, and she retired and they moved to the ranch. And then one day he didn't come in for lunch when he had been out plowing. And she went to the field and he had died. 3 days later, she was at the funeral. And right after the funeral, she fell over. When they took her to the ER, she had an inoperable brain tumor and they gave her only a few months to live. A friend of hers had brought her a Bible because when she had been moved into care, her sons one of the sons had her Bible. In the course of just this short amount of time, she went from an independent woman who was deeply in love with her husband to a widow with a brain tumor in full-time care. She had to sell her ranch, sell her cows. She had to give her dogs away. And I had sent the caregiver out to go have dinner and take a break. I'd spoken to the sons and I did what I do. I read Psalm 23. I read the Christmas story and the Easter story, and she's semi-comatose. She was very close to the end of life. And we don't know if people can hear us, but our training is to continue to speak to people as though they can hear us. So as I sat there, I was talking to her and I said, okay, I'm going to read you one more thing out of the Bible, and I will read to you from wherever the Bible falls open. And I let the Bible fall open and it fell to Ecclesiastes. And the verse was about there is a time to be born and a time to die. And I read this to her. And then later on that evening, after her sons arrived, she passed. 3 days later, I went to her funeral. And at her funeral was a pastor who had never met her. And I wasn't very happy with him at the end because he said to the congregation, okay, this is a passage she read at her funeral, and I don't know why, but that's what she wanted. So if you have a Bible, will you please open it to Ecclesiastes 3? And so, Chris, I have seen things in death that tell me there must be a higher and a greater power. And just because I can't put my finger on it or see it doesn't mean that it's not there. Did that make sense, Chris?
Sure does.
Okay. When we do these familiar religious or spiritual rituals, it helps decrease agitation in a person with dementia, especially a person near the end of life. And it increases the quality of life for the caregiver and for a little bit, the quality of life for the loved one, simply by doing the things that you knew that person had always done. And for most folks in certain generations, the Bible was the most read thing. And for other families, it might have been the Torah, not the Torah, the Jewish Bible, whose name I'm totally blanking on now, so forgive me. But people's religious books are very important to them because they're part of the family history, they're part of the history of your life, and they help to make a person feel soothed. Now, in gerontology, Chris, we have something called the cycle of life. And the cycle of life says that I am born in the fall and I will die in the fall. My mother is born in the summer, she will die in the summer. And when you look at demographics, after the age of 25, 78% of humans die in their cycle of life. The ones who didn't die in their cycle of life either died in an accident, died in war, had some sort of health event happen. And of the people that are remaining, the cycle of life, the window of time is 30 days before the person's birthday and 60 days after the person's birthday. And that's why when you look at obituaries, you'll notice how many people died in the time of their birth. So my birthday is September 1st. That would mean my cycle of life is August 1st to September 1st, September 1st to the end of September, October 1st to the end of October. It means that for my mother, her cycle of life is May 5th to June 5th, June 5th to August 5th, June 5th to July 5th, July 5th to August 5th. That is her window of time. And what's unusual about these demographics, Chris, is they hold true even in cancer and even in dementia. And today I'm at a conference in Seattle, and today someone said something to me about their loved one and asked a question. And one of the first things I said was, when is their birthday? Because even in cancer and even in dementia, humans still seem to follow this cycle of life. And if you're a religious person, all of the great books of religion speak about that there is a time to be born and a time to die, that there is a season and purpose to our life. And when you look at the demographics, after the age of 25, most of us are going to die in the cycle of our life. Before the age of 25, Chris, it doesn't work because number one, before the age of 25, nothing in your body hurts. You don't have any aches or pains. You don't have arthritis yet. And your brain hasn't finished developing. It doesn't finish till your early 30s. But people in before the age of 25 are more likely to die due to an accident for doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And it's because their brain hasn't developed yet. So if your buddy said, hey, Chris, let's see if we can jump off the bridge and hit the lake, you go, okay. And that might not have been the best idea. After the age of 25, most of us will pass in the cycle of our life. Now, being a friend during this time, Chris, can be especially challenging because I especially want to fix stuff for you. That's part of what I do. I want to make it better. I want to give you information. I want to help you get through this. And one of the hardest things you can do as a friend, but it makes you the best friend there is to accept intense emotions, to listen, and be comfortable with silences and crying. And what we tend to do, Chris, is instead try to talk our way through it, tell them it's going to be okay, and it's not going to be okay. Or we want to pat them on the back and we want this to stop because we're uncomfortable with crying. And as Americans, we're uncomfortable with silence. We want to feel that. And there's times when the best thing you can do is just be silent with your friend. You can actively support friends by bringing over meals. And in Texas culture, when someone dies, everybody brings food to the house. Maybe I don't need food right now, Chris. Maybe I actually need you to bring me food 3 months from now. You may find that you're helpful by shopping for someone. And if you're going to send a text message that says, I'm sorry for your loss, or an email, before you do that, buy a stamp and a card and write what you're feeling, because that card has more value to the person that's grieving than a text message or an email or a telephone call. And we know this, Chris, because we go into people's homes, and when that person who you sent that card to dies, that card is in their box of cards that they have kept always because it's so important. You can offer to do transportation for someone. You can offer to polish the kids' shoes before the funeral. You can offer to go get the car cleaned before the funeral. You can offer to clean the house, mow the yard. Accept that you don't have all the answers. Just know that we do not want to say to people, it's going to be okay. I know how you feel. You may know how you feel, but that doesn't mean you know how I feel. I may feel guilty. I may feel like I wasn't there enough. The most common thing dementia caregivers feel is that they didn't do enough. And we try to help you understand you did care for at least 10 years. You have done so much for your loved one. So if you're not the person grieving, do your best to be a good friend. Now, on the website and in your itty bitty book is a tool called the Actively Dying tool. And the purpose of this tool is to allow to understand what happens in the final 9 months of life. The final 9 months of life are called the period of actively dying. It's not the final day, it's the final 9 months. It took 9 months for life to form. It takes 9 months to the end of life. One of the interesting things, Chris, is 2 weeks after you were born is your first real smile. Research indicates 2 weeks before the end of life is the final true smile. So in the final months, what you will notice in your loved one is that there is a significant change, a change in their status. For reasons that we cannot understand, even though we have everything in place to care for this person. You have the caregivers, Chris, you'll have a roof over their head, you have great food, good people taking care of them, family visiting. And even though we're doing all the things correctly, the doctors come there, we have the medicine for them, we have hospice in place, they simply don't stabilize. And the doctor will change the diagnosis to adult failure to thrive. They will begin to talk about missing loved ones. And Chris, what can be so unusual about this can be a person with dementia who hasn't really spoken in the last year or hasn't said enough words to where they made sense to us. It's more word salad that we've been listening to, but they suddenly talk about missing a loved one. And Chris, this isn't, I miss Mama's peach cobbler. This is, I miss Mama. When my own grandmother entered into her final period of life, when she looked at me and told me that she missed her mother, I felt my heart clutch and I knew what journey we were on. And it scared me, it terrified me, and it just deeply saddened me because of the connection we have with those that we love. Another odd thing that begins to happen is people with dementia begin to have very clear and vivid dreams. And again, even though they haven't spoken very much, some of them are able to tell us that they've been dreaming about these certain things. They begin to slowly withdraw from social or family activities. And the way that you will see it happen, Chris, is this person will want to come be in the activity. Then they're still in the activity, but they're no longer engaging. They're using their energy to be there, but they're not using their energy to be part of the conversation. They're just listening. And then eventually they withdraw from everything. And one of the things that I saw in my grandmother, and this is again very normal, is the closer they get to the end of life, even though it may be a favorite niece or nephew, they don't have the energy to see those people. They tend to hold their energy to only see their family and their children. And I watched this with my grandmother, and I've seen it happen with death that I've seen with people throughout my career. So it is normal to begin to withdraw from social and family activities. In the final weeks, there is less and less eye contact. And what we notice is that when we walk into the room of your loved one, they're no longer making eye contact with us. Instead, they're looking up, and frequently they're reaching up as though they're seeing or talking to someone. They report seeing a favorite person, and this is a person that's already gone from this world, Chris. There's less and less interest in food and drink, and the body's not using hydration or nutrition the way your body does and my body does. They may feel like they have strange feelings in their limbs, and this is the very gradual slowing of circulation. And as the circulation slows, the muscle tissue feels differently. They tire very easily, their voice weakens very easily, and you may even hear them having conversations with people that are not there. This is a common thing for us to hear in a community, is a person in their room talking to somebody that nobody else can see. And they report people are telling them that it's time to come on. And whenever a person has told me this, Chris, at this point, the person that's telling them to come on is someone that they don't know or they don't recognize. They will tell me there was some strange lady in here telling me it was time to go, and I told her no. And that's usually an indicator that we're much closer to the end than we might have thought. It's important now when you visit your loved one that you're not afraid of silence. There's a point in time near the end of life where there's just not much else to say. And you need to find a way to just be comfortable being with them. We don't always have to talk. We can just hold hands. I can sit with my arm around you. But silence is not a bad thing. It's just something that as Americans, we're not accustomed to doing. So don't be afraid of the silence. It's just part of this final step of the journey that you're on. There are things that you can do to help at this point. Once your person is now in bed for the final part of life, ask the hospice nurse to show you how to clean their mouth, how to use the little pink sponge, how to keep their lips moist. You can use the fan to relieve agitation after exertion. And what this means, Chris, is even the act of standing out of bed, pivoting, using a bedside toilet, standing back up, pivoting, and going back in bed can make a person in the final weeks of life feel an agitation. And so we use a ceiling fan, we use a bedside fan, and I've actually been in houses where we didn't have a fan, and we took a magazine and fanned the person that way. The moving of air over the face helps bring that agitation down. It's important that you continue to talk to your loved one. Every step you make, you tell them what you're doing. Even if they're not speaking, even if there's no response, we continue to use their name and we continue to talk to them using their name. In my training, I was taught to not be silent in the room where someone is dying, but to continue to talk to them. Chris, one of people's biggest fears is that as they're dying, they hear people come into their room, the people peer at them, and then they hear the people go outside of the room and they hear whispering. And that makes people very anxious. That makes people a little paranoid. You can talk in front of the person with dementia, use their name. We believe that part of them still hears, so use their name. Tell them what you're feeling. And that's an okay thing for you to do. If you feel like you failed them, tell them you feel like you failed them. If you feel like you did your best, tell them you've done your best. But it will help bring closure to you, and it may bring closure to them. Learn how to reposition and turn your loved one. This is another thing you can do in the final days to make you feel part of this process with them and to not make you feel like, oh, strangers are doing it or people who aren't family. We're happy to show you what we're doing and show you how to do it so that you can be part of that final bit of care. And in repositioning your loved one, we're going to be using pillows so that as we turn them every 2 hours to make sure they are getting good blood flow and circulation the best that they can, we use pillows to hold them in that position. And then in 2 hours, we're going to turn them again because we want to do the best we can in this final bit of care. Ask the nurse how to use the oxygen machine. That will help you feel useful. Now, Chris, when I say that, I also want you to realize that once they begin to breathe through their mouth, the oxygen machine is no longer doing anything because they're not breathing through their nose. And the tubing can rub a blister here on their ears. It may be uncomfortable in their nose. And so if they're now breathing through their mouth, you can remove the oxygen because it's not providing anything for them. You can look at your actively dying handout and see where your person is in this process and understand that what they're doing is the normal way in which the human body ceases function and the human body shuts down at its own rate. It's like it's been described as a giant factory. There's not one switch you pull. There's multiple things the body has to do as it prepares for the end of life, and that includes slowing down and shutting down different organ systems as it goes into the final part of life. In the final days, it's important that you give permission to your loved one that it's okay if they're ready to go. There will be less and less interest in food and drink. And then, Chris, you may see a general restlessness. They may pick at their covers or pull at their pajamas. You may see leg tremors. And again, leg tremors or arm tremors are happening because muscle cells are elongated cells, and the slowing of circulation makes those cells twitch because they're elongated cells. The arms and legs feel that twitching. Pulse and breathing are starting to slow, but then it speeds back up, but then it starts to slow, but then it speeds back up. Kidney and liver function are starting to slow. Urine is now beginning to be a darker color on and gets darker and darker. And then, Chris, everybody in our field has seen somebody suddenly wake up, very alert, ask for their favorite meal. The family runs out and gets their favorite meal, comes back, the person eats the whole meal. Then the family shouts hallelujah, they go home, and the person dies later that night. And that is a normal thing that happens. In circulation, we are turning your person every 2 hours. We're using pillows to reposition them because we want to stop the possibility of skin breakdown because their skin is now so very, very fragile. And the person begins to breathe only through their mouth. Now, decubitus ulcers, these are known as bed sores, bed wounds. These happen in the final part of life in hours, not in days. And so if we don't continue to reposition the person, they run a risk of a skin breakdown. And as professionals, we don't want to do a great job of care and then fail on the final day of life. So we're going to keep turning your loved one, even if to you it may seem like we're making them uncomfortable. We're going to move them again as soon as we can, but we've got to keep turning them. In this slide, what it's showing you is every place in red is the most common place for a person at the end of life to develop bed sores, decubitus ulcers, wounds, because these are the areas of the body where bone and skin are touching the sheet. And one of the most unusual places, Chris, are the heels and the back of the head. And I think that sort of shocks people. The reason hospice has a little crate that goes on the end of the bed and lifts the weight of the covers off your loved one is because when they're laying on their back, the simple weight of a sheet alone can cause the heels to begin to open with a wound. And we don't want that to happen. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, when you go to bed tonight, lay flat in your bed with your feet pointing straight up, pull only a sheet over your body and count the seconds until your heels start to burn. And you will understand that it only takes a few seconds for that to happen. And that burning means circulation is not going there. And without circulation, the skin dies, the wound opens, and this occurs very, very rapidly. So we have to be super, super careful about this. This is now a very powerful moment, and it can be very difficult to do, but it is a moment you will not forget. So be still, have faith, and know that your loved one loved you. Now, Chris, as I say this, I want to talk about Ma Jean. If you have an itty bitty book, the dedication page is to Ma Jean. And when my best friend Betsy called to tell me that her mother was dying, I left from where I live and started to Ma Jean's house. Betsy left Dallas and started to Lampasas. I got there ahead of her because I live much closer. When I got there, I went in to see Ma Jean, and there's an unusual group of older ladies in Lampasas, Texas. And they're a group of ladies that not only play bridge and golf together, but they're in their late 90s and they've known each other since they were children. And Betsy, one of her mother's friends, was in the room with Ma Jean. And as I walked in, her friend, who was 99 and had driven herself over there and was aging normally, when I walked in, Ma Jean's friend said, "Do you feel them? Can you feel the souls gathering?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "I can feel parents right there. I can feel her husband, James C., right here." And I said, "There's a man over here, but I don't know who that is." And she said, "That's what I feel. I don't know who that is either." Well, Betsy came in a little bit later, and she scooped her mother up in her arms, Chris, and she held her dearly and she held her lovingly. And she said to her mother, "Mama, if you're ready to go, you go. We're going to be okay. Everybody's here. We all love you. It's okay. If you need to go, you go. You go be with grandma and grandpa. You go be with daddy. You go be with your family." And then Betsy laid her mother down gently and she stepped back and just looked at her mother. And after a few seconds, Chris, I leaned over and said, "Betsy, what are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I gave her permission to die, so she dies now, right?" And I realized, oh my goodness, this is a very intelligent, highly educated lady. And she thinks giving permission means this person's going to go, "Okay, I'm dying now," and go to sleep. And I realized that I needed to do a better job of explaining to people, we want you to give permission, but that doesn't mean the person's going to look at you and then die. The body takes about a week for it to move through the process of shutting itself down. You with me, Chris?
I am.
Okay. Now, Ma Jean did some things in her final few days, and these are things that I have seen multiple times in my career. As her caregiver was doing things for her, she heard Ma Jean talking. And what she heard her say was, "George, Mama was never the same after you left." And when the caregiver, Mary, told me this, I realized that the other soul that I was feeling in her room was her brother, who had died in a car accident after leaving Ma Jean's house after he had had dinner there one night. And that was the other person soul that I felt like I was feeling in that room. And the other thing that was interesting to me was that Ma Jean didn't say Mama was never the same after you died. She said Mama was never the same after you left. The next day, Mary reported that she heard Ma Jean talking again, and she went in there and said, "Who are you talking to?" And Ma Jean said, "Well, James C., he did that silly thing at the bank, and I'm just still mad at him about it." And then Ma Jean went back to having a conversation with her husband who had died 30 years earlier. The next day, she heard Ma Jean talking, and when she went in there, she heard her say, "Mama, I'm going to be there soon." And those are things that you will hear if you're there. And those are very powerful things and things to carry with you during the grieving process, because this is not unusual to have happen. In the final hours of life, your person will have a calmness. They may or may not respond to speech and sound, but again, we ask you to continue to use their name, to not whisper around them, but to talk to the person that's still there. They may not follow movement around the room. And the eyes are usually at a point that is referred to as doll's eyes. And this is an old nurse's term. And it comes from having baby dolls from the 20s through the 70s, that the eyes were on a little string in the doll's head and the eyes would move, but now the eyes have locked. And the person in the end of life, it is normal that their mouth is open and that their eyes are about half open. They're in a semi-comatose state. You may see trembling or twitching in the limbs. It may even be a lot of movement in the limbs. And again, this is blood circulation slowing. You begin to hear gurgling, and gurgling is what is referred to as the death rattle in old times. It was referred to as the death rattle. And what it is the brain is now using energy only on the core of the body, on the organ systems. It is slowly giving up circulation in the feet and the hands. It is focusing only on the organ systems, and it's not even using energy to swallow saliva. So what you're hearing is saliva pooling in the back of your loved one's throat, and as they breathe in and out, that saliva rattles and makes a gurgling sound. They have a semi-comatose appearance, and at this point, fever may come and go. The fever is happening because the brain recognizes the body is now overwhelmed with infection, and it makes one more effort to try to raise the body temperature to fight the infection. They're now breathing through the mouth. Kidney function is now very slow. We begin to see mottling, and mottling means that circulation has slowed to such an effect that in the feet, the heels, the hands, up to the knees or up to the elbows may begin to take on a bluish or a purplish color because circulation is not going through those areas well. A pressure wound, a decubitus ulcer, a bed sore can now open in a matter of hours. And so we're very, very careful with your loved one. Heart rate and respiration rate are continuing to slow, and then they may speed up and the person may go back to 14 breaths a minute before they begin to drop back down. You may have an odor that you're smelling, and what you're smelling is not your person being bad. It's actually necrotic tissue. Dead tissue is now in the body system. And they begin to develop apnea with Cheyne-Stokes breathing. Cheyne-Stokes breathing means that the person has a very heavy, ragged breath. Apnea is the stopping of breathing between breaths. And so, Chris, I'm going to try to do this for you. I've been speaking all day, so I'm probably going to cough, but this is what Cheyne-Stokes breathing and apnea look like. The person will go, and then you will think they have passed, but you'll notice their pulse is still going here at the neck. And it could be 5 seconds to 90 seconds before the next breath comes. And 90 seconds, Chris, is an eternity. But I once was with a pastor, and for 4 hours, his apnea was a 90-second break between each breath. And that was unusual. Not something that we would normally see. It's normally a 5 to 15 second, maybe 30-second apnea, and then back to that breath again. And then there is the final breath. And then in the final exhalation, you may see something different. There may be spittle or foam in the corner of the mouth, and that is normal. And the final exhalation may make a pa sound. The body will immediately appear to shrink. And if you are religious, that is the belief that the soul has left the body. The body very quickly becomes pale and cool and gray because part of your coloring, Chris, comes from blood circulation. The eyes and mouth are typically open in death. And this isn't like it is on TV or in the movies. You can't wave your hand and make the eyes shut. That's actually done at the funeral home. The mouth is open because for your mouth to shut, the brain must be alive to tell muscles in your jaw to constrict and shut your mouth. That's also done at the funeral home. So it's not a grimace, it's not a scream of pain. It is the normal presentation of a human during the end of life. The eyes are now flattened because part of the curvature of your eye is blood pressure. There's now no blood pressure. The body may have a slight final movement as the last electricity in the body leaves, and the body may release urine or stool. And this is normal. This is nothing for you to be bothered about. Now, there's things that we say when someone passes, and I encourage you to look at the website grief.com. David Kessler is the other author of The Stages of Grief. A thing is, I am so sorry for your loss. Not, well, they're in a better place. A thing to say is, I wish I had the right words. Know that I care. I don't know how you feel, but I am here to help in any way you can. You and your loved ones are in my thoughts and prayers. My favorite memory of your loved one is, Chris, one of the things that we know that people do without intending to is they stop saying the person's name, especially the death of a younger person. And what that ends up doing to the person who's grieving is it makes you feel, they didn't really love my loved one. They won't even say their name. Other things to say are to remind that person you're just a phone call away. Sometimes there's nothing to say, but a hug means so very much. It's okay to say we all need help at times like this, and I'm here for you. And that's all. You don't need to add any more. I'm here for you. I'm up late. I'm up early. Call if you need anything, or say nothing and just be with the person. And this is very hard to do. Sometimes you have to practice doing this because your need as a human to comfort someone may mean saying something that's inappropriate, and that's not at all what you want to do. In the grief after death, for about 3 days, Chris, the human brain doesn't really seem to record very much. And that's why, as you realize your loved one has passed, you go through denial, you may go through anger, bargaining, uh, whatever the fourth one is, and then acceptance. You may go through all of those things again, even though you thought you had finished them. And then the grief after death includes feeling numb because for those 3 days, you really don't remember the funeral. You may not remember things that people said to you. You may not remember things that people have done for you. And that's normal. We think what's happening, Chris, is that the brain has sort of gone on to this neutral thing and it's busy moving present tense about your loved one into past tense. We're not really sure what's going on. We just know that in this time of grief right after death, you don't really process information the way you normally do. It's normal to feel numb, anger. It's normal to have regrets. I didn't get there at time. I should have been in the room. So let me go a little bit further into that. When Ma Jean was dying, and we had now been with her for 7 days, and we knew that she was close to the end. One of the unusual things about thanatology research is that it appears that many people will not die if someone is still in their room, especially a family member that they love. And so one of the theories is that your soul and that person's soul are so connected that if you don't step out of the room, their soul cannot make the break from the body. And with Betsy's mother, we were now getting a little punchy, and we decided to just all stand up, walk to the kitchen, get a drink of water, and actually do Greenstone's amazing ice cube trick, which was to help Betsy calm down because she was really having a difficult time right then. We weren't out of the room, Chris, more than 4 minutes. And when Betsy walked back in there, her mother was gone. And so for a moment, she felt regret, but then she remembered that we had already talked about Ma Jean may not be able to make the break from this life if you're in the room. And sure enough, the minute her favorite granddaughter, her only daughter, and I like to think me, left the room, Chris, then her soul passed. You may find that your body feels worse, that you actually have a physical reaction. And one of the unusual things we see in dementia caregivers, Chris, is that about 6 months after the death of their loved one, they will finally get physically sick. They may get a cold, they may get a flu. It's as though their body finally allowed them to be sick after they'd been a caregiver for so long. You may have strange sensations in your body, things that just don't feel right. And you go to the doctor, and the doctor can't find a causation for it because it's a physical aspect of grief. You may have outburst. Your husband brings you a cup of coffee just trying to be nice, and you chop his head off because you're grieving. You may have surprises or forgetfulness. And Chris, this is things like picking up the phone to call your grandmother and then realizing she's not here anymore. You may find yourself starting to drive to your community and realize she's not there anymore. And those are normal things. You may have reoccurring pictures that happen to you where you see that person over and over again. And you may very well have dreams about your loved one. And these are all normal things that happen to humans when we grieve. When we talk to kids, preschool kids grieve. It's just that their grief is very concrete because they don't understand the finality of death. So, things that I have seen children in my family say is, well, Nanny went to heaven. We miss Nanny. Why don't we just go to heaven and get Nanny and bring her back? We'll get an airplane and go up there because planes fly near the heavens. Your kids might have been at the cemetery and they say things like, we miss grandpa. Let's just go dig him back up and bring him home. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's a little kid trying to make sense out of this thing that they don't understand. School age, preteens grieve very much the way adults grieve. And if we don't allow them to grieve, we don't let them see us grieve, Chris, we can actually change how that child grieves for the rest of their life and how they view death, not as a normal thing, but as something to be greatly afraid of. Teenagers, well, Chris, you're probably going to want to kill them. It's not that they didn't love their grandparents or this person that's gone. It's that teenagers cannot fathom why anyone wants to be older than 25. They're pretty sure you're not doing anything fun. They know there's no sex going on, and they just can't understand it because it doesn't quite make sense to them. So even though they're grieving, after the funeral, they may want the keys to the car and $20 so they can go see friends and hang out at the mall. Everybody grieves differently. You may have a teen who grieves that way, or you may have a teenager who grieves the way an adult does, but that's more unusual. A new way of counting time begins, Chris. It is normal for people to not see the year anymore, but for this to become the first Christmas without daddy, the first Hanukkah without mom, the first Easter, the first Father's Day, the third Mother's Day, and we actually begin to count time based on the years that have passed since my loved one died. The actual time for grieving is that it takes at least a decade. And that's very challenging for us because we no longer have grief items. In the 1800s, if a person was dressed in black and wore black every day, it meant they were grieving, and their grief was for a year that they wore this particular thing. There was jewelry made to grieve with. There would be a brooch that had your person's hair in it, a strand of their hair curled up in it. There were rings that were made that had a strand of your person's hair in it. And it was something that you carried with you. But when outsiders saw that jewelry, even a stranger, Chris, knew that you were grieving, and they knew to treat you in a certain way because of that. In our work, they give you 3 days. Then you need to come back to work. Your friends, after about 6 weeks, they want you to be over this grief thing because after all, they had dementia, or after all, they were really old, or after all, they were really old and had dementia, and your grief is making us uncomfortable. To grieve for somebody you love is at least a decade. To grieve for a child that you've lost is a lifetime. Those are two different types of grief that go on. But grieving is something that takes time. And for the dementia family, you may feel as though your grief has already happened and is complete, and that's okay. For others, it may feel for you as that this is a fresh wound and it has just started all over again. Remember to breathe. Breathe in to the count of 4, hold for the count of 2, and breathe out to the count of 6. This helps your body when you're starting to have trouble with your grief process or you need to just calm down. Okay, Chris, normally at this point, nobody has any questions for me and they just want me to go away. So do we have any questions?
If you have a question, you can type it into the chat or raise your hand. We have Donna who has a question. Try now, Donna.
Are y'all still there?
We're here, not hearing Donna. Donna, you might need to try unmuting. I've allowed your microphone, so. All right, well, waiting on Donna. Is there anyone who would like to maybe give it a go or have a question? Maureen does say excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, there may not be a lot of questions. This is hard stuff and it can bring up a lot of emotions. So it's okay if you don't feel like asking questions right now. That's okay too.
You, Fran? Oh.
Hi, everyone. Can
Hi,
you hear
Fran.
me?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Cam, for everything. It's just such informational, everything you're saying. It's just actually hitting close to home for me. The personal question I'm going through with my family and my ex-mother-in-law, and she has body dementia. And, you know, her son, which is my son's father, is he gets angry a lot of the times, and I don't know how to console him during his grief now because he feels like he needs to do everything, and he's not sure if he's making the right decisions. And I thought maybe I could ask Dr. Tam on how, maybe a suggestion on helping him through his grieving process, because he just seems so angry and gets very frustrated with her very fast. And so in order to mediate and calm him, I'm not really sure what to do. So that was my question.
Has his wife already passed?
No, this is his mom. His mom is now in a community at New Perspective, which is actually one of our competitors down here. And she just got admitted about 2 weeks ago. Prior to that, though, she was declining pretty fast. And ever since he's found out about her diagnosis, he's just not happy anymore. And he's just angry, and he does cry, but I think he holds it all in, and he doesn't know how to release it. So I tried with him this webinar. I think it would be a good resource for him, but I'm just not sure how to approach him. And I think that the breathing technique that you're showing us too really helps, and I think I can inform him of that too. But I just thought maybe she hasn't passed, but in his eyes, it's like that's not my mother anymore, and that's a different person, and I don't know how to deal with that. So that's what he tells me.
Well, I think that's probably what most families feel, is that that's not my person anymore. My person is gone. Sometimes we can talk to families just by bringing up the obvious. You seem so angry about this disease. That's normal. Is there something I can help you with? It's also, I think sometimes people have a fear that their person is going to be bedbound and dying forever. And certain dementias, like Lewy bodies, they tend to be pretty ambulatory until the final week of life or the final 2 weeks of life. So it could just be a friend that you just need to say to him, I notice how that you seem angry. And is there anything I can talk? Do you need somebody to talk to? It can be just that they don't realize how angry they seem or that other people are noticing it, and they do need to talk to someone. And some odd things that can help. Hot chocolate is soothing when we're grieving. We don't know why. We just know that it's one of the things that will help soothe the family. And a new thing that's being used and seems to be very helpful is asking families to write poetry as part of their grief process. This doesn't have to be poetry that we did in seventh grade where it all must rhyme. It can just be a run-on of words and what you feel. Another thing is to ask the son to write a letter to himself about what he's done for her as her son, how much he loved her, what a good caregiver he's tried to be, how in a disease where you didn't get all the information, you didn't turn your back, but you continued to do care for someone. So sometimes it helps just to point out to them what you're noticing and that you're concerned about him, because it can be that he's hung in grief in the anger part and he just needs someone to talk about to it. That didn't sound right either, but it's normal to feel those things and it's normal to be angry. This isn't what my mother's life was supposed to be like. This isn't what retirement was going to be like. This isn't how we were supposed to spend our final years. And people can feel like they've been robbed of that time. So I think just because you've noticed it, you could probably just have a conversation with him.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. That's probably good advice that is good advice for so many of us when we do either get stuck in anger or we recognize anger and it just is the emotion that at that point is coming from that, individual.
And it
Donna
can be
did,
scary, right?
yeah,
It
can be
can be
scary.
very scary that they're going to focus that anger on you. And maybe what they need to do is actually twist a tea towel, bite it, and scream as loud as they can, because that scream technique is to get anger out of your body. Because so many of the times, this is a disease that can make you feel angry
Mhm.
because you're
Yeah.
watching your loved one go through it.
Donna's question was posted to the chat. If someone has had dementia for 10 years and are 89 years old, is there any research that shows they may just die in their sleep versus going through what you have described here?
It just varies from person to person. Most
Mhm.
people with dementia do just have a heart attack or stroke and they pass in the night. That's just not at all unusual. 89 means the person is of a very great age. In gerontology, we refer to that age as they're entering into the time of the oldest old. That person, that lady who's 89, has outlived the ladies that she was born with from that same time period by 18 years. She would be considered to be extremely old. I mean, I'm sure as you look around, you notice that not a lot of her friends are left. So everybody is different. Most people with dementia will die of heart attack or stroke. And I know that sounds weird, but that's just part of the process of what happens is we've been able to study it. So most people are not going to live to be bedbound, although the final part, the final week or 2 weeks of life, most people are in bed at that point. But I can't really tell you how she's going to go, just what the odds are.
We have a question from Kelly Blades. Kelly?
Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear
Hi,
me?
yep. Yes, we
Oh,
can.
perfect. Okay. Hi, Dr. Tam, it's Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
I missed the beginning of this because I always struggle with technology and couldn't get logged in. But I accidentally hit the hands up sign and I did it twice trying to take it off and didn't know how to take it off. But I'm glad to have the opportunity to tell you again, thank you for this wonderful seminar that you did in Wichita. It was great. And Diane and I are here together watching you. And um, when I think this is so good for us to hear, me to hear. Diane's been through it already, and I haven't. And when I think about my husband being in these positions that you spoke about and these things happening and going through this transitioning and everything, my chest just gets tight. And it's like, I don't want that to happen so badly, but I do at the same time. Something you mentioned was, make me comfortable, give me chocolate and let me go. And the let me go part is just not, that's a hard. I can make him comfortable and give him chocolate, but it's just difficult to let him go. And so I'm want to work on that. And so I'm sorry I don't have a question and I accidentally hit my hand up. So, but good to talk to you.
But thank you, Kelly. But Kelly, part of that too is your age and the age of your husband. You know,
Yeah.
your husband's not in his 80s or 90s, and most people only see death once or twice in their lifetime. It's the death of a parent or the death of a spouse. And so the things that you're feeling, the tightening in your chest, the constriction, that's all normal. Now, I do want you to see your doctor and talk about your about anxiety and depression and all the other things that a caregiver goes through, just so that if you do need something, your doctor is supporting you on it. But I promise you, you're not the only person who will see this video or who has been in on this that doesn't feel the same thing. I mean, I felt myself get emotional as I talked about Ma Jean, because I'm still in the grieving process for her because she was so very important to me, even though she died 4 years ago. And so what you're feeling is normal, but it's important to listen to your body and let your body say to you, I'm hurting and maybe I need more help than what I'm getting. And to the point where my chest is feeling constricted, maybe I need to see someone to talk about that. So, not at all unusual for family caregivers to talk to a trauma counselor because you are going through a trauma, and not at all unusual to talk to your physician and let your physician know that when I think about my husband's condition and where he is, and that this is a terminal disease, I begin to react physiologically to it because I think that's normal. But we also want to make sure that the doctor says everything's looking good on you because you're going through something that your friends aren't going through because of your age and because of your husband's age. And it is different when you're in that generation and not 20 or 30 years older. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
You hang in there.
Thank you.
In case you aren't reading in the chat, for the group, DE has recommended a good book called Like Falling Through a Cloud, a lyrical memoir of coping with forgetfulness, confusion, and a dreaded diagnosis. Like Falling Through a Cloud.
Mm-hmm. You
Charlotte,
can also go to Barbara Carnes, Karnes. She's an RN who wrote a book that's called The Little Blue Book. And for years as a social worker, I had no idea that this person who wrote this was still alive or that this was actually a book that she sold. And so the nursing home would simply make copies of it for us to give out when someone was dying. But she's got very helpful stuff. I think everything you can read will just help you be that much better prepared. So anything somebody recognizes is going to be helpful.
Charlotte, you have your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Tam. Thank you.
Hi.
Wonderful presentation. Really, really appreciate it.
Okay. It's okay. Well, it's not okay, but it's okay that you're having emotions. That's normal. Okay. Just deep breath.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, it's my loved one is my sister, and she's only 68, and it we didn't know for a long time. I know that she had, you know, I think her personality was the thing that was changing when we noticed it, like differences in her. She's so much has happened, and she's been at the memory care facility for 2 years now, and I just find it so odd that someone who was so much younger would have dementia. And I feel like we're seeing it so much more prevalent today than, you know, in ever. Because I can remember, like, my great grandmother, she was still, and I was just a little girl, and she was pretty quick, pretty quick-witted and stuff like that. I just, do you find any ideas of what is going on? Is this, I feel like this stuff is in our food, but for Cindy, I think that she, we kind of felt like maybe when she went through breast cancer and chemotherapy and radiation, we felt like that the chemo brain she experienced kind of might have been part of this. Is there anything in your knowledge or research that shows what may be making this so much more common?
It's more common because we have a larger population of people. We have the largest population ever in the world, which is the baby boomers, and your sister is a part of that group. So we have a whole lot more people than we've ever had. We have more people alive right now over the age of 65 than had ever been alive in the history of the earth. So we have a huge population of baby boomers around the world. So you have more people, you have more dementia. In 5 generations, and human evolution is very, very slow, we have gone from food we grew ourselves, food we bought from our neighbors, meat products that we grew ourselves or bought from our local butcher, to food that is very highly processed, has a lot of chemicals in it, to bottles of water that have microplastic in it that is being, the body can't get rid of it and it's actually storing in the brain. We don't move the way people were expected to move. People evolved to walk 88 to 20 miles a day, not 10,000 steps. And every time they came up with some new appliance for us, a vacuum cleaner, a dishwasher, every one of those things took away that many more steps a person took during the day. People used to walk everywhere. Now we have automobiles, scooters. Kids don't even walk around college anymore. They skateboard or they ride an electric scooter. Kids don't get out of their stroller. They're kept in a stroller longer than I would have been kept as a child. You were expected to get up and move your body. And so we've seen a change in the amount of movement that a person does, the amount of energy they use during the day. We've seen a change in the amount of exercise that a person does during the day. We've seen a change not only in the food that we're eating, but then the amount of food that we're eating. So if you think about your grandmother's dinner plates, they were this big. Today's plate is this big. If you look at how much food is on a plate, your stomach is the size of your two fists together. Your heart is the size of one fist, but your stomach is two. Well, how much food does it take to fill up that much space? And so part of it is the food we're eating, and part is that we're not exercising the way that humans evolved to exercise. And all of this change has happened over a very short period of time. We've gone from grandparents that ate 1.5 pounds of sugar a year to today's teenager eats an estimated 154.5 pounds of sugar a year, and all of that on processed foods. So our diet has changed, our exercise has changed. Your sister is young, and that's very unusual. I'm guessing there's an early onset Alzheimer's there because you don't talk about other family members having something. So it's a sporadic thing that would have happened to her. And you're right. When you go into memory care, she probably is one of the youngest people in there, and that can be startling. So I think everything you're feeling is normal. When we have somebody who has a dementia already in place, the brain has 100 billion brain cells. And it seems to be that the brain can lose 20 billion brain cells and nobody can tell that the person is ill. But the minute they lose 20,001 billion or 20 billion and one brain cells, it's now apparent something's wrong. So in the course of treatment for breast cancer, the effect of chemotherapy, which we call chemobrain, actually just removed that ability of your sister's brain to continue to be able to function. And the results of the chemobrain were that you were finally able to see that something was wrong with your sister. Whereas if she hadn't had chemotherapy, if she hadn't developed breast cancer, this might have been a dementia that y'all didn't see for a few more years, but it was in place, but it took something else to show you that it was there. So for some families, it's not the chemotherapy that showed them. It was a hospitalization, a flu, a pneumonia, something that required going to the hospital, a fall, one blow to the head. And suddenly it appeared that as though dementia just popped up out of nowhere. And what it really was the dementia was already there, but this one more thing became the straw on the camel's back. And you could then see what was happening.
Okay.
So go to your short IQ code, and every single sentence starts with compared to 10 years ago today, and try to go back and think on holidays when you saw your sister. Think about what she was really, really doing, and look at your photographs. Find photographs of your sister from the last 10 years, blow the face up in them, and look at her face. And you should see that there was something different about her. It's just that you didn't notice it because it was so subtle, because the brain is so complex that even with significant brain damage, the person still doesn't appear ill. And that's more than likely what happened with her, because somebody going through chemotherapy doesn't develop dementia, or we would have an awful lot of more people with dementia. It's
Okay.
just that it opened up the space to where you could see there is something else wrong here.
Okay.
And it is normal to feel the way you're feeling. It's normal to feel overcome by emotion. And it's normal to have your voice crack and to have that because you love this person. So
Yeah.
all of that is normal.
Yeah. And she did have, actually, she had a lot of illnesses. She had 3 abdominal surgeries in less than a year, like in a 9-month span of time.
And each one of those involved anesthesia.
Exactly.
And each load of anesthesia didn't quite clear the brain correctly, because she would have already had little microscopic holes in her brain where there should have been neurons.
Okay.
And so it was probably the cumulative effect of all of those gave you the feeling that after all this horrible stuff had happened to her with her stomach surgeries and then her breast cancer, and then good Lord, look what else. And this was already in place. It's just the other things added on to it.
Okay.
You're a good sister.
Thank you. She was the best.
You're pretty good.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Tam, there's one last question in the chat.
Sure.
I'm sure this is probably this is a great question and probably one that deserves its own entire webinar. Can you speak more to what the end stages of a person with Alzheimer's is often like?
I thought we just did that. Am I not understanding the question?
Kristen, I'm reading what Kristen typed.
Okay.
Something more to what the end stages of the person going through Alzheimer's, possibly referencing the staging tool is a good way to.
Yeah, if you'll look at your dementia behavioral assessment tool, beginning in stage 5, there's a box that says nurses should now be watching for this. And then as you go into stage 6, the DBAT has got the actively dying tool folded into it. So if you'll look at the behaviors on stage 5, 6, and 7, you'll see, especially in 6 and 7, the things that we would anticipate seeing in those final 2 stages of life. And that is because the process of actively dying is not uncommon that it begins in stage 6. And remember, it's about a 9-month period of actively dying. So you will see these behaviors occur, and those are the behaviors that we're going to see in any human that dies. And you're going to see those same things in a person with Alzheimer's or one of the other forms of dementia. One of the differences is the person with Alzheimer's could be in stage 7 and bedbound for several months or even a year. Normally, people with different forms of dementia, Lewy body, we tend to see them still up and mobile until the final 2 weeks or week of life. That's not uncommon in other dementias. Alzheimer's, you might actually have that stage 7 person. And so if you'll just look at your tool, it's got sort of a recapping of everything that we talked about tonight, but it's written down for you.
And that tool can be found on Dr. Tam's website, as well as in your itty bitty book, or reach out to any Anthem community. We will be happy to email it to you or go through it with you.
And that is very helpful. I mean, I encourage you, talk to your Anthem person and let them help you do your staging, because they're going to look at the stages clinically, whereas you have love and emotion for this person, and you can easily not see what we see to us very clearly. And to give you an example, I met with a family who came in and said he absolutely is only at the very beginning of stage 5. And the brother said, oh, he can do this, 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 and this. And the sister-in-law said, yes, when I talk to him, we talk about this, this, and this. And the wife said, yes, he can do this, this, and he talks. And when he came in, he had no language skills. He was using word salad. It was bits and pieces of words, bits and pieces of sentences. But because of the emotion the family had, they thought he was in late stage 4, and he was very clearly well into stage 6. So let an Anthem person help you do your staging, because they're able to look at your person clinically. And for you, that can be much, much more difficult to see. And then once it's shown to you, you're able to follow your person a little bit better. But that's a common thing. It's hard to see it in somebody you love.
I think with that, we will wrap up the session tonight. I know you've had a very full day of educating and speaking to folks, and we sure appreciate your time tonight. We will have another final session. I believe it's your final session with Dr. Tam on October the 9th, 6 p.m. Central Time. And the topic is compassion, fatigue, and caregiver stress, what every caregiver needs to know. And if you are receiving invitations through Anthem, we will be happy to again send you an invitation. If you found us through another way, reach out to Anthem and make sure to get on our list. And we will be posting this to YouTube, as Chris mentioned in the beginning of the webinar.
Hey, take care, everybody. Remember to take care of you.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Tam. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank
Thank
y'all.
you.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Dr. Tam.
Bye-bye.
Much.